At 19, I was kicked out for being pregnant with my dying fiancé's child. My father slammed the table and said, "You're no longer my daughter." I walked out with nothing but my baby and a promise. 15 years later, they showed up, shaky, older, desperate to meet the boy they tried to erase. But what they didn't expect was who he had become. And when they saw him, their faces froze. You'll want to hear what happened next. My name is Olivia Jenkins. I'm 36 years old, and when my father found out I was pregnant 18 years ago, he threw me out of the house. His face twisted with disappointment and anger. He yelled, "What have you done?" My family was unaware of the tragic reality of my pregnancy. They opted for brutality over empathy and judgment over comprehension. They are now coming to see my son and myself after a 15-year hiatus. When they witness what their rejection produced, they have no idea what is ahead of them or how their worlds will fall apart. Tell me where you're watching from before I share my story with you. As I share how my family's faces froze when they realized the price of their brutality, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. I was raised in a modest Hartford, Connecticut, suburb in a close-knit, devout household. Silas Quinn, my father, wasn't your typical father. An elder at First Community Church and the proud owner of Jenkins Construction, a business he founded from the ground up, he was a cornerstone of our community. He was seen as the perfect family man, and people looked to him for guidance. Lillian, my mother, was the epitome of what a conventional wife and mother should be. She kept our house immaculate, volunteered for every church event, and somehow made sure that dinner was on the table at precisely 6 o'clock every night. Her garden was featured twice in our local Home and Garden magazine, and her chocolate chip cookies won the county fair 3 times in a row. She had a soft laugh that put everyone in her vicinity at ease. Then there was my brother, Michael, who was the eldest of our family and 2 years older than me. He was a straight-A student, a star quarterback, and his senior yearbook voted him most likely to succeed. At Michael's games, Dad would be the loudest voice in the stadium, beaming with joy. He would exclaim, "That's my boy," anytime Michael made a clever move. Sitting next to him, invisible, I would constantly wish for a small portion of that zeal to be aimed at me. From the outside, our life appeared to be ideal. Summer barbecues, Sunday services followed by brunch, family game evenings, and the 4-bedroom colonial with the white picket fence. Everyone believed that we were the family that others wanted to be. I met Elias Rowan in my junior year English class when I was 17 years old. We were paired up to work on a Romeo and Juliet assignment. Ironic, given the course of our story. Elias was different from the other schoolboys. His intelligent brown eyes appeared to see right through all the high school feigning, and he was quiet but self-assured. When we first met at the library to study, we spoke for 3 hours and hardly worked on our task. I was told that day, "You're different, Olivia," by him. You see things others miss. The usual teenage fare didn't appeal to Elias. He was helping at the animal shelter and writing heartwarming poems while other students were organizing parties and worrying about their social standing. I could feel every note of his performance vibrate through me because he played the cello with such passion. Slowly, consciously, and with a depth that seemed unattainable for teenagers, we fell in love. We dreamed a lot. Elias planned to attend Juilliard to study music composition. He had already received a partial scholarship of acceptance. He was only a subway ride away from NYU, where I intended to pursue my nursing degree. We discussed the life we would create, the excursions we would take during breaks, and finding an apartment together after our freshman year. When we were together, anything seemed conceivable. Unlike most high school romances, ours was unique. We took our time establishing physical intimacy. We both grew up in religious homes and proceeded cautiously, respecting others' boundaries and concentrating on creating something worthwhile. Elias was liked by my parents, or at least they liked what they knew about him. He hailed from a good home, was well-behaved, and excelled academically. Elias was the only boy that Dad would ever allow near his daughter, he would even joke. Then, shortly after graduation, everything fell apart. Acute myeloid leukemia, an aggressive form of the disease that had already progressed considerably, was the diagnosis that rocked everything after it began as persistent weariness and strange bruises. Elias blamed stress and weariness from his senior year for his months-long illness. I vividly recall holding his hand while the doctor went over side effects, treatment options, and survival percentages in that sterile hospital room. Elias simply nodded serenely while I fought back tears and he asked me perceptive questions. He eventually broke down when we were by ourselves. "I'm not afraid of dying, Liv," he said in a crackly whisper. "I'm afraid of leaving nothing behind. Of being forgotten." The severe chemotherapy started right away, destroying his body but not being able to eradicate the malignancy. He lost his curly brown hair. His muscular body grew thin. There were days when the pain was so bad he could hardly talk. But his spirit was intact throughout it all. One day in between treatment cycles, Elias brought up a topic we had never really talked about previously. He squeezed my hand and remarked, "I want to leave something of myself in this world. If I don't make it, I want to know there's a part of me still here, still with you." We spent hours discussing what he meant, including the prospect of having a child together before he passed away. We didn't make that choice hastily. We talked about every possibility, every worry, and every hope. This was not careless adolescence. It was a decision based on the purest kind of love and a strong reaction to mortality. My feelings were all over the place when I found out I was pregnant 2 months later. I was happy that a piece of Elias would live on. I was afraid to tell my deeply religious parents, and I was sad that Elias might never get to see his kid. Despite all the suffering, there was one thing that was certain: we had produced something lovely. After I figured out just how to explain, how to make them see that this was about love and legacy in the midst of terrible loss, not about rebellion or bad decisions, I intended to inform my parents. When Elias recovered from his most recent round of therapy, I wanted him to be there when I told them. However, the call that would further rock my life came before I could locate the ideal time. Elias was being taken back to the hospital after collapsing at home. He was unconscious when I got there, his body finally giving out after the strain of struggling for so long. I knew my meticulous preparations would have to change as I stood in the intensive care unit, watching machines breathe for the boy I loved. I had no idea at the time how drastically everything was going to collapse. I never had the opportunity to inform my parents about my pregnancy in a way that was convenient for me. The pregnancy test, which I had concealed in the back of my vanity drawer, wrapped in tissue paper, was discovered by my mother, Lillian, while she was cleaning my bathroom. I had been holding out for the ideal opportunity. I'm waiting on Elias to be stable enough to accompany me to my family. When I returned home from the hospital that evening, my parents were seated stiff at the table in our dining room. Their faces were harshly shadowed by the overhead light, giving them an unfamiliar appearance. Like evidence at a trial, the pregnancy test rested between them. My father remarked, "Sit down, Olivia," in a really composed tone. I recognized that tone, the one he used when he was too furious to yell. My hands were shaking under the table as I sat. My father exploded before I could say anything, before I could explain Elias's disease or the love that led to our choice. He slammed his fist so hard on the table that the china jumped as he yelled, "What have you done? After everything we've taught you, after all the values we've instilled, you throw it all away for what? Some teenage rebellion?" My attempt was to interrupt. "Dad, please." My mother's voice was thin and prepared as she finally spoke. "It's not what you think. Elias is Elias. He's involved in this?" With a deep red flush, my father went on, "We welcomed him into our home. We trusted him with our daughter. You've brought shame to this family, to our church. What will people say? The elder's daughter, pregnant out of wedlock." I gave it another go. He interrupted me, saying, "If you would just listen, no, you listen, you have two choices. You fix this problem or you leave this house. I will not have this sinful behavior under my roof." I felt the remarks as if they were actual blows. Solve this issue. As though my kid, Elias's baby, the part of him that would endure, was just a bothersome error that needed to be fixed. "I can't do that," I muttered as the tears poured down my cheeks. "I won't do that. Elias is dying. This baby might be all that's left of him." My father's expression briefly changed from one of confusion to the first signs of understanding. My brother Michael entered before I could say anything more, and his timing was as bad as ever. He looked from one of us to the other and questioned, "What's going on?" "Your sister is pregnant," my dad said without emotion, "and apparently thinks keeping it is the right decision." "Seriously, Olivia? How could you be so selfish? Do you have any idea what this will do to Mom and Dad's reputation? To the business?" Michael asked me, his eyes widening and then narrowing. It hurt more than I thought that he had betrayed me. Although Michael and I had never been particularly close, I had always trusted that he would support me in times of need. He immediately took the side of our parents instead, caring more about his reputation than my welfare. My mother was largely silent during this entire confrontation. Michael's allegations and my father's ranting were less painful than her silence. With no protection or consolation, she simply sat there, sometimes wiping at her eyes with a tissue. The mother who used to hold me through my childhood nightmares and patch my scratched knees was unable to look me in the eye. I eventually succeeded in saying Elias has leukemia into the antagonistic stillness. He's dying. He might not live to see the birth. This baby is his legacy. His last wish. If you would just come to the hospital with me, talk to his doctors, you'd understand. My father cut me off with enough excuses. Your choices are clear. Fix the situation or find somewhere else to live. Tearfully, I walked away from the table and went to my bedroom to phone Elias's parents. During the lengthy hospital stays, they essentially became my second family because they had been so supportive during his illness. They offered me their guest room for as long as I needed it as soon as I told them what had happened. I headed immediately to the hospital the following morning. Elias's skin was yellowish and pulled taut over his cheekbones, and he was weak but alert. I didn't want to add to his tension, but I had to let him know what was going on. I held his brittle hand and said, "My parents found out about the baby. They're making me choose between getting rid of it or leaving home." With a solitary tear trickling down his hollow cheek, Elias closed his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Liv. This is all my fault." "No," I demanded, blotting his tear. "This was our decision. A decision made from love." He squirmed as he made an attempt to sit up. "Tell them to come here. Let me explain. Let me take responsibility." I gave a headshake. "They won't listen. Dad's made up his mind." Elias reclined, fatigue taking him once more. He squeezed my hand before he fell asleep. "Promise me you'll keep our baby safe. Promise me you'll tell them about me someday." "I promise," I muttered as I planted a kiss on his forehead. I went back home later that day to gather my belongings in the hopes of averting another altercation. My father, however, was waiting in the living room, sitting rigidly as though he had been there for hours. He said, "So you've made your choice," which was an accusation more than a question. I said, "You're the one making choices, Dad," and I was surprised at how composed I sounded. "You're choosing your reputation over your daughter and grandchild." He yelled, "Don't you dare turn this around on me. You created this situation." I started for the stairs, but my brother stopped me. "I went through your phone," he declared, his face displaying a mix of self-righteousness and disdain. "While you were at the hospital. There are no texts about Elias having cancer. Nothing about any serious illness." I felt sick to my stomach. "That's because we talk when I'm there or his parents call me. How dare you go through my private messages?" Michael was trying to understand, my father said in support of him. "To find the truth you're obviously hiding." "The truth?" I asked with a sour laugh. "The truth is that none of you has bothered to ask how I feel, or to come with me to see Elias. The truth is you'd rather believe I'm lying than accept that your perfect daughter made a choice you don't approve of." With trembling hands I tossed clothes and necessities into a duffel bag and hurried upstairs, pushing by Michael. My mother was standing at the bottom of the stairs with red-rimmed eyes when I descended again. Silently, "Olivia, please," she said. "Think about what you're doing." I briefly believed that she might finally defend me. Perhaps she will be the mother I much needed. "You're throwing away your future," she continued. "No, Mom," I said, my final hope fading. "I'm protecting it. Elias is my future." As I left, my father was there in the doorway, his parting comments more poignant than any previous one. "If you walk out that door with this shameful secret, you're no longer my daughter." I stared him in the eyes and committed his face to memory, even though I knew it would be years before I saw it again. After saying, "I already stopped being your daughter the moment you stopped being my father," I stepped outside into the encroaching darkness. 16 years old. Expecting a child. All by myself. After being disowned, the first few weeks were a blur of sadness and anxiety. My savings from my part-time job at the library were barely enough to keep me afloat, and I had nowhere permanent to stay. Although I knew it was only temporary, Elias's parents had given their guest room. In addition to the financial burden of medical expenditures, they were already dealing with the emotional toll of seeing their son deteriorate. I spent 3 nights sleeping in my car, which was parked behind the hospital so I could use the restaurant and public facilities. With one hand covering my still flat stomach, I would curl up in the back seat and murmur to my unborn kid that we would somehow survive. During the day, I frantically looked for any job that would take a pregnant teen without a college degree or references. Before Sunshine Diner on the outskirts of town took a risk on me, I was turned away from 7 different establishments. After I sobbed in her office, the manager, a stern woman named Patty, hired me as a waitress. She responded, "I don't need your life story, honey," as she moved a box of tissues across the desk. "Just be on time and don't steal from the register." I took a second job stocking shelves at a convenience store from 10 o'clock at night until 2 o'clock in the morning because the diner work hardly covered gas and food. I would go see Elias in between shifts and see him deteriorate as the aggressive cancer took over his body. He hardly recognized me on certain days. On other days, he would be bright enough to discuss our child in the future he knew he would not experience. Taryn, my coworker at the diner, discovered that I was living in my car after noticing that I was nodding off during breaks. She has a 4-year-old kid named Zoe and was a 25-year-old single mother. One afternoon, she firmly told me, "You can't live like this. Especially not pregnant. I've got a pull-out couch. It's not much, but it's better than a Honda back seat." Embarrassed by my predicament, I attempted to decline, but Taryn would not listen. Her insistence was, one mom helping another, no arguments. I never would have imagined what a gift it was to move into Taryn's small one-bedroom apartment. I took the couch from the living room and she and Zoe shared the bedroom. We both knew it couldn't be permanent, and Taryn's landlord was unaware that I was staying there, so it was still a risky existence. But I had a roof over my head and someone who cared for me for the first time since I was kicked out. Elias's health quickly worsened in the interim. When his organs started to fail, the harsh chemotherapy that had been his final chance was withdrawn. Throughout it all, Juniper and Alden Rowan, his parents, served as role models for elegance and strength. They never once questioned her choice about the child or made me feel bad about being pregnant. While we were keeping watch beside Elias's bed one evening, Juniper informed me, "You're carrying our grandchild. Your family now, no matter what happens." It was unbearably heartbreaking to compare their unwavering support with the rejection I experienced from my own family. I would occasionally catch myself checking my phone in the hopes of receiving a text or call from my parents, some sign that they had changed their minds. With the exception of business calls and hospital updates, however, my phone was silent. Our financial circumstances became more and more bad. The experimental treatments Elias's parents had pursued had depleted their funds, and he lacked health insurance beyond the minimum coverage they had managed to obtain. I heard Alden discussing selling their car to cover palliative care costs and taking out a second mortgage on their home. The worst happened when I was 5 months pregnant. Juniper called while I was working a double shift at the diner. When she said, "You need to come now," her voice broke. "The doctors don't think he'll make it through the night." Without giving a reason, I left my tables and drove to the hospital amid a blinding downpour that reflected my inner agony. Elias was hardly conscious by the time I got there. His skin was yellow and translucent, and his breath came in heavy gasps. Machines beeped and hummed throughout the room, keeping an eye on the son I loved as he passed away. When he saw me, he muttered, "Live," in a voice so low I had to stoop to hear it. His hand was shaking as he reached for my now visible baby bulge. "Feel," he murmured. I pointed his fingers in the direction of our child's kick. When he sensed the movement, a shadow of a smile appeared on his lips. "Strong," he whispered. "Like you." Hours passed while we remained in that position, my hand over his on my stomach, neither of us realizing what was about to happen. A nurse eventually brought me a chair so I could sit next to the bed and not have to move. A little after midnight, Elias's eyes suddenly met mine. "Promise me," he murmured, struggling with each word. "Tell our baby about me. About us. How much I wanted to stay." "I promise," I said in tears. "Every day, they'll know everything about you." With great effort, Elias extracted a little velvet box from beneath his pillow. There was a tiny sapphire stone set into a dainty silver ring. "My grandmother's," he clarified. "Wanted to give it to you properly." Unable to talk, I slipped it upon my finger. His voice suddenly became louder as he said, "I love you, Olivia Jenkins," as though he had been reserving his strength for these last words. "Always." His final comprehensible words were those. By morning, Elias Rowan had left, taking all of our aspirations with him, leaving me to continue living the lovely life we had built together by myself. The funeral went by quickly. Now that I couldn't conceal my pregnancy, I stood apart from the other mourners. Some of our old classmates made up their own versions of our narrative while whispering behind their hands. Elias's parents asked that I support them as family, but I could sense that other churchgoers were judging me. My mother and father were conspicuously missing from the same church where my father served as an elder. I got a letter from the hospital's management 2 weeks later. Elias had taken part in a trial on experimental cancer treatment. He had named me as his fiancée on the documents, so I was entitled to payment for his involvement as his next of kin. It was only $3,000. However, it was like winning the lotto in my dire circumstances. I went into early labor shortly after. I contacted Juniper Wilson when I was scared and alone, and she took me to the hospital right away. 6 weeks ahead of schedule, but struggling to survive, Callan Elias Jenkins was born after 26 hours of excruciating labor. He weighed only 5 pounds 3 ounces and had a striking dark hairstyle that was distinctively Elias's. I made another secret vow when the nurses laid him on my chest, this little marvel between his father's chin and my nose. I would do whatever it took to give this boy the life that he and I had imagined. Throughout it all, Juniper and Alden helped me with the onerous paperwork, brought me food, and took pictures. But they broke the bad news 2 weeks after Callan was born. They couldn't afford to turn down the job offer Alden received in Arizona. With tears in her eyes, Juniper embraced Callan for the final time before they moved, promising, "We'll send money whenever we can. And we'll visit." He's our connection to Elias. My support network shrank to Taryn, who was battling her own issues when the Wilsons left. The hospital's study compensation money was helpful for a short time, but it quickly vanished between paying Taryn's rent, buying food, and buying baby necessities. I was severely affected by postpartum depression. On some days I was scarcely able to move from my bed. There were times when I felt like my soul was being pierced by Callan's tears. I had a deep love for my son, but I was crushed by the weight of my responsibilities, loneliness, and loss. When Callan was 3 months old, I sent a birth announcement to my parents' address out of a last-ditch effort. I included a picture of Callan, draped in the blue blanket Elias's mother had knitted, looking serious at the camera with eyes just like his father's. I scribbled the following on the back. Your grandson, Callan Elias Jenkins. Born December 12th. Weeks went by with no answer. One Sunday, knowing my parents would be home from church, I finally got up the nerve to drive to their house. My pulse thumping, I walked up the well-known path to the front door with Callan curled in my arms. My dad replied. With fresh wrinkles carved around his mouth and gray streaks running through his dark hair, he appeared older. I briefly thought I recognized him from the look in his eyes. Maybe even regret. Then his face became stern. He said bluntly, "We have nothing to say to you," consciously averting his eyes from the infant in my arms. He shut the door before I could reply. My son was wriggling against me as I stood there on the porch where I used to play as a kid, tears running down my cheeks. Then for a brief moment before the curtain returned to its original position, I saw movement in the living room window, my mother's face. I saw my brother Michael coming out of his car as I made my way back to mine. For a time, none of us moved as our gazes locked. "Michael," I began, moving Callan to face his uncle. Michael glanced over my shoulder at our parents' house after glancing from me to the infant. He passed us silently, acting as though I didn't exist. That was the day I really started to realize that I was completely alone. I'd have to make myself, no matter what kind of family I had. Everything abruptly went apart 6 months after I made an unsuccessful attempt to get back in touch with my family. After learning that I was residing there illegally, Taryn's landlord threatened to evict me if I didn't vacate right away. Callan had a dangerously high temperature that same week that persisted even after using over-the-counter medicine. As Callan screamed in his makeshift cradle, his tiny body blazing with fever, I packed our scant possessions into garbage bags. One last reminder of how vulnerable we were was the crumpled eviction notice on the kitchen counter. Taryn responded, bouncing her own daughter on her hip. "I'm so sorry, Olivia. If it was just up to me." I told her, "It's okay, even if nothing was. You've done more than enough." I packed Callan and our things into my old Honda Civic and headed for the emergency department because I had nowhere else to go. I was more frightened by his listless whimpering than by his previous shouting, and his fever had reached 103 degrees. My automobile lurched to a stop halfway to the hospital, making a horrible grinding noise. As I frantically navigated to the shoulder, smoke billowed from under the hood. I tried restarting it, but it did not work. Not a single click. Something inside of me finally shattered as I sat there on the side of the road with my sick kid in the back seat, my car dead, and nowhere to call home. I pressed my head against the steering wheel and started crying, letting out loud, rumbling sobs that came from my very core. It was the result of all of this. Elias's passing, the rejection of my family, the never-ending fight for survival. And now I worry that I might also lose Callan. "I can't do this," I said in a whisper to myself. "I can't do this alone anymore." I was shocked out of my reverie by a tap on my window. I recognized the face through my tears, Mrs. Rodriguez, my Spanish teacher in high school. With a mixture of desperation and shame, I rolled down the window. "How are you doing, Olivia?" Her forehead was wrinkled in anxiety as she asked. "I saw your car as I was passing by. I had to say my son is sick. The vehicle broke down. I was attempting to reach the medical facility." Mrs. Rodriguez looked at Callan, who was crying and blushing in the back seat. She opened my passenger door without reluctance. She said, "Get in my car. I'll take you to the emergency room. Later we can take care of your car." While the physicians examined Callan in the emergency department, Mrs. Rodriguez, Solana, as she insisted I call her, remained by my side. An ear infection that had gotten dangerously worse was the diagnosis. They informed me that it might have spread to his brain if we had waited much longer. Solana calmly recounted my tale, including Elias's passing, my pregnancy, my family's rejection, and our current homelessness, while Callan was given antibiotics via intravenous. She passed Kleenex to me or squeezed my hand as she listened without casting judgment. When I was done, she said, "You'll stay with me," in a tone that begged for no debate. My finished basement has a bathroom of its own. It's secure and clean, but it's not fancy. I said, "I can't impose like that." Solana answered, "When it's given freely, it's not imposing. In addition, since my husband went away, I've been rattling around that house by myself. A little life would be beneficial." After Callan was stabilized and freed that evening, Solana took us to her little Cape Cod-style house. With a daybed, a portable crib she had somehow managed to get throughout Callan's treatment, and a tiny sitting area, the basement she had indicated was surprisingly comfortable. She showed me around and said, "This is temporary. Just until you're able to stand again." However, transitory does not imply hurried. The turning point I hadn't dared hope for was Solana's generosity. I could now look beyond survival now that I had a secure place to live and dependable childcare. She insisted on watching Callan while I worked. One evening during dinner, Solana informed me, "You're smart, Olivia. Too intelligent to spend all of their time in unfulfilling positions. How about returning to school?" At first, the concept looked unfeasible. I had given up on my dream of attending college when everything fell apart. Solana, however, persisted. She guided me in applying for financial aid, researching online nursing programs, and creating a plan that would enable me to study and still make enough money to support Callan. "You don't have to let Elias ruin your dream of becoming a nurse," she remarked. "Perhaps it has even greater significance now." I laboriously and slowly created a fresh vision for our future. I worked nighttime hours at an assisted care facility that paid better than the diner, attended community college to complete my nursing prerequisites, and treasured every second spent with my developing kid. Under the steady schedule and extra affection of Grandma Solana, as she called herself, Callan was flourishing. Another unexpected turn came 6 months into this new chapter. I received a certified letter addressed to me. It came from an unknown law firm asking me to get in touch with them about Elias Rowan's inheritance. I contacted the number on the list, a little startled and confused. According to the lawyer who responded, Elias had named me and our pregnant child as beneficiaries of a small life insurance policy that he had taken out during his brief period of remission. Callan was also entitled to a medical trust fund, because Elias had contributed to the research that resulted from his participation in the experimental treatment study until his death. The attorney said, "The pharmaceutical company used data from your fiancé's case to help develop a breakthrough treatment. They have set up trust funds for the surviving participants' children as part of their ethics agreement. With the exception of school costs, money won't be available until Callan becomes 18, but it will fully pay for college." As the lawyer described numbers that sounded unattainable, I sat on Solana's flowery couch with my phone to my ear and tears running down my cheeks. Although the $40,000 life insurance wasn't much, it represented freedom to me. Callan would never have to worry about paying for college because the educational trust was large enough. After putting Callan to bed that evening, I sat by myself in the backyard and looked at the stars that I thought Elias may be able to see. "You continue to look after us," I said in a whisper to the night sky. "You're still keeping your word." I was able to concentrate less on working several jobs and more on my academics thanks to the money from the life insurance. I received a single-parent scholarship to an accelerated nursing program after completing my prerequisites with a flawless GPA. Our lives were gradually but steadily changing. Callan was demonstrating remarkable intelligence by the time he was 3 years old. He was able to read picture books we checked out from the library and spoke in complete phrases. By 4 o'clock, he was playing easy tunes on Solana's antique upright piano, his tiny fingers picking up the notes with a sense of intuition that made me cry. Our youngster is a living testament to Elias's musical talent. When Callan was 5 years old, I had numerous employment offers and the highest accolades when I graduated with my nursing degree. My own experience as a young mother drew me to pediatrics, and I accepted a job at Hartford Children's Hospital. I cried with pride and thankfulness as I stood in the empty living room on the day I purchased our first tiny home. A simple 2-bedroom cottage with a fenced yard where Callan could play. 5 years from homelessness to homeownership. From forsaken daughter to self-sufficient mother. A registered nurse after being a broken girl. Callan was so excited that he rushed from room to room. "Mom, is this truly ours? Forever and ever." I watched him whirl joyfully in the slivers of sunlight coming through our own windows and vowed, "Forever and ever." As I sat on our front porch that evening after putting Callan to bed in his new bedroom, I became aware of a significant change that had occurred within me. At last, the nagging unease and the unceasing worry had started to fade. Something I hadn't experienced in years took its place. Hope for real happiness, not merely for survival. After moving into our first house, we had years of hard-won stability and steady growth. From staff nurse to charge nurse, my role at Hartford Children's Hospital changed. In a bittersweet full circle from the times I'd spent in identical hallways with Elias, I was offered the position of nursing director for the oncology department by the time I was 30. Callan flourished in ways that never ceased to astound me. His musical ability was what really set him apart, even though his intellectual prowess put him 2 grades above his age group. He was performing piano concertos that college students found difficult by the time he was 10 years old. He wrote an original composition at the age of 12 that was performed at Lincoln Center in New York, after winning the National Young Composers Competition. I fervently hoped Elias could have witnessed the amazing person our son had grown into as I stood in that esteemed concert hall, watching him take a bow while the audience stood in a standing ovation. But in some way I could feel him by my side, taking part in that moment of unadulterated pride. My professional growth brought me financial stability I never would have thought possible. Ironically, a large 4-bedroom house in one of Hartford's most upscale neighborhoods, just 3 miles from my childhood home, replaced the small cottage. Callan had his own music room in our new home, complete with a baby grand piano that I had been saving for years to buy. And my network of support had expanded. Solana, who was more of a grandma to Callan than a teacher to me, continued to be our support. I had developed close contacts with other single mothers and medical professionals who were sympathetic to my situation through work in Callan's school. By getting together for holidays, helping one another through difficult times, and commemorating life achievements together, we established our own unique kind of family. Juniper and Alden Rowan traveled from Arizona to see Callan play and spend valuable time with their grandson whenever they could. Callan, who loved every detail about the father he had never met, was able to preserve Elias' memory thanks to the stories and pictures they brought. Juniper would observe Callan playing the piano and remark, "He has Elias's hands." Music was meant to be played with those long fingers. Something unforeseen occurred in the spring of Callan's 11th year that would once more change the trajectory of our lives. A significant pharmaceutical business that had created Callan's educational trust years prior sent me a formal letter. Elias had taken part in an experimental procedure that produced a revolutionary medication that is currently saving thousands of lives. The families of the initial trial participants were receiving compensation for their contributions to medical science as part of a patent settlement. I was shocked to learn the settlement amount in the letter. $5 million plus future sales royalties. In order to help young cancer patients and their families with non-medical costs like housing, transportation, and childcare, practical necessities that insurance never covers but that can mean the difference between stability and disaster during treatment. I founded the Elias Rowan Memorial Foundation after speaking with financial advisors and lawyers. Families of children with cancer could stay for free at a housing complex close to Hartford Hospital as part of the foundation's initial project. Callan cut the ribbon and played an original piece honoring the father he knew only through images and stories as the Elias Rowan House opened on what would have been Elias's 35th birthday. The opening was covered by local news, which focused on our personal narrative as well as the objective of the organization. Interviews with families who would benefit from the accommodation, pictures of Callan at his piano, and a synopsis of how our journey had brought us to this point of giving back were all included in the piece. I had no idea that my family's wall of silence would ultimately be broken by this local news broadcast. The email showed up in my mailbox 3 days after the broadcast. From Nathaniel. Subject: You were featured on the news. I've wanted to reach out for years but didn't know how. Mom and Dad saw it too. Dad's had some health problems recently, and seeing you and Callan, it affected him. They want to meet him, their grandson. Would you consider allowing a visit? I gazed at the screen for a while, feeling conflicted. Anger over the years of rejection, reluctance to let people back into our lives who had deeply wounded me, curiosity about what had finally caused them to change their minds, and underneath it all, a tiny tenacious whisper from the girl who had once longed for her family's love and approval. I responded to Michael after giving it some thought and having a lengthy discussion with my therapist, who had been there for me the entire time. I wouldn't stop Callan from getting to know his family, but first there would have to be open communication and clear boundaries. After a careful email exchange with Michael, we discovered that our parents had, in fact, evolved throughout time. The year before, my father had had a heart attack, a near-death experience that had tempered his formerly unyielding outlook. Michael said my mother had never ceased to lament the end of our relationship. Every time my name came up, she kept a covert album of news clippings from neighborhood gatherings and hospital announcements. Michael wrote they were wrong in one message. They know that now. Dad especially. He talks about you when he thinks no one is listening, about how proud he is of what you've accomplished on your own. The next month, we made plans for them to come to our house. In addition to the house, Callan and I also spent weeks getting ready. Now that he was old enough to comprehend intricate family dynamics, I gave my son an explanation of the grandparents he had never met in their absence from our life. Are they evil individuals? With the straightforward simplicity of a child, he inquired. No, I said after giving it some thought. They are individuals who make poor decisions as a result of their fear and adherence to outdated ideologies. However, humans can evolve. We will also check to see if they have. I wavered between a peculiar peace and anxiousness as the day of their visit drew near. I had established a stable, prosperous, and satisfying existence. Callan and I would be fine no matter what happened to my family of origin. That insight provided me the strength that comes from understanding your own value, which I had not experienced at our last meeting. Even though lunch would not be served for hours, I found myself rearranging flowers for the third time, smoothing out undetectable wrinkles from sofa cushions, and checking the oven on the day my family was coming. Callan laughed as he observed my anxious energy. He put a soft touch on my arm and murmured, "Mom, the house is perfect. And we are too." At 13, his maturity occasionally left me speechless. He had to mature more quickly than other kids in many aspects since he was aware of our complex past and the lack of conventional family structures in his early years. But instead of making him resentful, these difficulties had given him a remarkable capacity for empathy and a quiet wisdom. An automobile pulled into our circular driveway at exactly noon. I watched from the window as my brother and parents came out, their steps tentative as they surveyed the magnificent outside of our house. My father's once dominant demeanor had faded, and he appeared considerably older than his 62 years, leaning heavily on a cane. With her hair still in the same haircut but now entirely gray, my mother looked as if she had been stuck in time. Michael, who was obviously the physical support they both required, stood between them. Callan was sitting at the piano, silently tracing patterns on the keys with his fingers, a nervous habit he formed whenever he was frightened. I whispered to him, "They're here." "Should I perform a song?" Callan asked in a lower-than-normal voice. I squeezed his shoulder and advised him to just be himself. That is more than sufficient. I wanted to take charge of our first reunion, so I opened the front door before they could ring the bell. We all just stared at one another across the threshold, across the 15 years that had kept our worlds apart, for a moment, awkwardly. At last, with tears in her eyes, my mother said, "Olivia, you look stunning." I said, "Please come in," without acknowledging or dismissing the compliment. I moved aside to let them inside the opulent lobby, complete with a crystal chandelier and a sweeping staircase. When they saw the proof of our existence, the one they had opted out of, their eyes grew wide. Photographs documenting our voyage, including Callan at his piano recital, the two of us in France, and the dedication of the Elias Rowan House, were displayed on the wall together with Callan's accolades and diplomas. A professional portrait of Elias from before his sickness was prominently placed among them, his smile bright and full of the life that had been cut short. My dad's eyes were fixed on the picture. His face went white. "Is that?" He started. "It's Elias Rowan," I said. "The father of Callan." Callan entered the foyer from the neighboring music room as if he had been waiting for it. My family was immediately and significantly impacted. My mom's hand flew to her mouth as she gasped. My father wavered a little and tightened his hold on his cane. Even Michael appeared in disbelief after seeing Callan on the news. The explanation was clear. Callan was exactly like Elias at the age of 13. The same weight moved slightly to one side, the same stance, the same chiseled jawline, and the same soulful brown eyes. My straight nose and the dimple in his left cheek when he smiled were the only things he had in common with me. As I had instructed him, Callan extended his hand and said, "Hello, with grace. My name is Callan Jenkins. I'm glad to have met you." My father grasped Callan's hand and stepped forward first, his hand shaking. His voice was thick as he said, "My name is Silas." "Your grandfather?" I almost lost my temper at that straightforward introduction, which acknowledged the bond he had previously denied. Next to speak was my mother, who was crying uncontrollably. "My name is Lillian," she said. "Your granny. Can I give you a hug?" Callan turned to me for direction. I gave him a small nod, letting him make the decision. He moved forward and let her hug him, awkwardly, tenderly, and patted her back in that cute, indecisive way teens do. I led them all to the living room, which has a wall of windows that look out onto the garden, and said, "Let's sit down. We have a lot to discuss." An awkward hush fell once they were seated. Sensing the tension, Callan was the first to speak. "Do you want to listen to my music?" He made the offer. According to Mom, music facilitates challenging conversations. He went to the piano and started playing without waiting for a response. It was a straightforward, eerie tune he had written himself, not one of his intricate concertos. Like a gentle glow, the notes enveloped every unsaid feeling in the room. As Callan played, I whispered. Elias played cello. He was admitted to Juilliard prior to his illness. "Is ill?" My dad said it again. Like a burden, the question hung in the air. 15 years ago they had refused to hear the truth. Now it was time to speak it. I finally told them everything, to the sound of Callan's music. About Elias's leukemia diagnosis shortly after graduation, his fear of leaving everything behind, our determination to have a child together before he passed away, his last days and the vows we made. Despite the pain in my chest, I spoke steadily and stated, "He never got to meet Callan. He knew he was leaving us a part of himself when he passed away, but he wasn't sure if we would be all right." During my narration, my father's expression had changed from that of a strict patriarch to that of a broken man facing the seriousness of his error. As if attempting to commit every detail of Callan to memory, my mother sobbed softly into a handkerchief while repeatedly glancing at him at the piano. My father's voice was scarcely heard as he eventually added, "We didn't know. Concerning the cancer. We pondered. I tried to tell you," I responded, expressing the facts without making any accusations. "Several times. You wouldn't pay attention." "No," he said with a lowered head. "We wouldn't." Michael leaned forward after being silent up to this point. "I was searching for evidence that you were lying when I looked through your phone that day," he added. "I wanted you to tell a falsehood. Accepting what was happening was more difficult. I persuaded myself, as well as my parents, that you made it up because I couldn't uncover any texts regarding Elias's condition." "What took place next?" my mother asked in a low voice. After we. I informed them. Regarding the vehicle, the medical facility, the job at the diner, the employment at the convenience shop, the extended evenings, the early birth. Regarding Elias's parents' generosity and their final relocation to Arizona. Solana Reyes discovered me crying next to a car that had broken down, with Callan in the back seat, stricken with fever. About how we started from scratch and used education, perseverance, and the money Elias had discreetly left behind for life insurance to build our lives. And the pharmaceutical settlement that made it possible for us to use the foundation to give back. My father's face was losing color as I spoke, and I could see his breathing becoming labored. Additionally, he closed his eyes as though in agony when I explained how I had stood on their doorstep with newborn Callan only to be turned away. "I remember that day," my mother said, regretting what she had said. "I saw you through the window. I wanted to run out to see my grandson, but I was a coward. And I walked past you like you were a stranger," Michael said in a low voice. "My own sister. My nephew." Callan was no longer playing. His hand found mine as he sat next to me on the couch. I gained the courage to ask the question that had been bothering me for 15 years because of him. "Why now?" I asked plainly. "What's the point of reaching out now?" With tears in his eyes, my father cleared his voice. "Last year's heart attack. It forces you to consider the important things. What you've lost. what you may never be able to correct. He hesitated, clearly straining. Then you appeared in the news. The Elias-named foundation. Callan is playing the piano. I came to terms with the years we would never be able to regain because of my pride. We are not requesting forgiveness, my mother hastily added. We're not worthy of that. We only wanted to meet Callan, own up to our horrible error, and express our immense pride in the woman you have grown into, without our assistance. Callan silently supported me by squeezing my hand one more. I kindly corrected. I didn't do it entirely alone. When they could, Elias's parents offered assistance. When we had nothing, Mrs. Rodriguez provided us with a house. In the absence of my own family, friends became family. Callan smiled slightly and said, "And you had me?" "Yes," I replied with a smile. "You were always with me." After a moment of awkward stillness, Callan abruptly stood up. He declared, "I'm going to get the photo albums. You ought to see what you were missing." When he was out of the room, I looked directly at my family. I said, "I'm willing to try developing a relationship going forward, but there must be boundaries. My top priority is Callan. He has always been aware of you, but he also understands why you were not a part of our lives. You must be dependable and unwavering if you wish to be his grandparents and uncle." "Anything," my father answered right away in a raspy voice. "Whatever conditions you establish." I said, "We'll start slowly. Supper. Occasional visits. Let's see how it turns out." Callan brought his school portfolio and a few photo albums back. He began by presenting a diploma bearing the emblem of a prominent music school, saying, "I want to show you something first. The Juilliard pre-college program accepted me. Similar to my father." My parents exchanged astonished glances. First to speak, my father's voice was full of passion. "Callan, your father would be so proud of you. Just as we are." I noticed a change in my chest for the first time since they got there. Not quite forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of recovery. I excused myself to check on lunch as Callan started going through pictures and telling the tale of our life together. I needed some time to comprehend the whirlpool of emotions. I leaned against the counter in the kitchen and inhaled deeply. I could hear Callan's excited voice describing his creations through the doorway. My mom's kind inquiries. My father's astonished reactions. The sound of family, flawed and broken but perhaps not irreparable. I stroked the sapphire band that Elias gave me on his deathbed, and that I still wore on a chain around my neck. It was his grandmother's ring. Over whatever barrier stood between us, I muttered to him, "We're okay. We succeeded." Additionally, it's possible that our family is returning to us. Rebuilding family ties took place gradually and cautiously in the months after that initial challenging reunion. I allowed room for something fresh to develop while maintaining strict limits and refused to act as though the past had never happened. My brother and parents gradually gained their positions in our family by being there consistently and making sincere attempts. Although unpleasant, our first Thanksgiving together was significant. Callan was adamant about saying grace. "Thank you, God, for second chances, and the bravery to accept them," he said. My brother and parents were seated around the table, along with Elias's parents, who had flown in especially for the event, Mrs. Rodriguez, and hospital co-workers who had become close friends. It was a mosaic of connections. Others were made in love and common suffering, while others were forged in blood. It might have been tense when Juniper and Alden first met my parents, but Juniper's graciousness won over. As she saw Callan perform a difficult piano piece for his grandfathers, she said to my mother, "We've all lost time with this wonderful boy. Let's stop wasting now." Our trip included family therapy. Just my parents and me at times. Occasionally Michael or Callan are included. During those sessions, terrible facts that had been suppressed for years were aired out loud. During one particularly frank session, my father said, "I was more concerned with what the church elders would think than with what my daughter needed. I placed notoriety before love, and I made the biggest error of my life." My mother disclosed that she had a hidden box filled with newspaper clippings about me, including community awards, nursing school graduation announcements, and anything else that included my name. She admitted, "At the time I was too weak to resist your father, but my love for you never faded, or being concerned for my grandson." The hurt of desertion persisted despite these admissions. However, they made it easier for me to accept my parents for who they were, terribly flawed people who had made bad decisions. Not monsters. Only people. That realization was essential to my own recovery. Compared to my parents, my relationship with Michael changed more swiftly. We found things in common as adults that we had never found as kids. Callan was given the extended family relationship he had always desired when his wife and 3 girls accepted him as a cousin and nephew. I kept the life and the self I had created despite all of these changes. My erasure was not necessary for our mending, and that was the best indicator of my progress above all else. My career progressed further when I was promoted to the position of Chief Nursing Officer at the pediatric hospital. By creating a scholarship program for young musicians dealing with medical issues and building a second family housing center, the Elias Rowan Foundation broadened its scope. At 14 years old, Callan was excelling in the Juilliard pre-college program and traveling to New York City every weekend for rigorous instruction. Inspired by the father he never met, his composition legacy was chosen for the New York Philharmonic's Young Composers Showcase, an almost unprecedented accolade for a person of his age. Our complete family occupied a whole row at Lincoln Center on the night of the show. Despite their weakness, my parents were determined to be there. Michael with his relatives. Rodriguez, Mrs. Elias's parents. My closest co-workers. I could feel the depth of the journey we had taken as Callan took the stage, looking so much like Elias that it occasionally took my breath away. Callan's homage to his father's instrument, the cello, opened the piece with a lone, melancholy note before developing into a sophisticated piano orchestra conversation. Words could never express our story as well as the music did. Resilience replacing loss and hardship. Beauty emerging from pain. Community emerging from isolation. I stroked the sapphire ring that I still wear around my neck on special occasions as the last notes faded and the audience erupted in ovation. As I watched the miracle of our baby and the life we had forged from the ashes of dashed hopes, I could practically feel Elias by my side. In the silence of our hotel room later that evening, Callan asked me a question that surprised me. Will you ever be able to fully forgive Grandpa and Grandma? I gave his question a lot of thought. Callan, forgiveness isn't a single instant. It's a procedure. While I don't forget what happened, I've forgiven them enough to let them into our life and accept them for who they are now. That's the forgiveness I can offer at this time. He gave a contemplative nod. Elias would wish for your happiness. You often tell me that about him. I concurred that he would. And I'm content. Incredibly joyful. It was accurate. The journey to this point had been tremendously challenging and painful, something I would never want to happen to anyone. However, that same traumatic experience had made me stronger, kinder, and more driven than I otherwise may have been. It showed me that family isn't only about blood, it's also about who sticks together when all else fails. It had demonstrated to me that my value came from my own fortitude and decisions rather than from the approval of others. Above all, it had given me Callan, the live expression of a love that is stronger than death itself. A daily reminder that our deepest wounds can sometimes yield our greatest benefits. We hosted a memorial performance at the Foundation's facility the following spring, which coincided with the 15th anniversary of Elias's passing. Callan raised money for the next family housing project by performing with musicians who had contributed their time. My mother hovered protectively close by, and my father, who is now in a wheelchair but nevertheless has a sharp mind, attended. My father gestured for me to join him in a secluded place as the visitors mixed at the reception following the show. I have something to tell you, he replied, his voice faltering with emotion and age. I should have said that years ago. As I sat next to him, I observed how the once tough man who had rigidly dominated my youth had become softer with time. I was mistaken, he replied plainly. About all I taught you about conditional love, not just about kicking you out. God's love or true love is independent of flawless conduct or fulfilling expectations. It endures despite errors and discrepancies. That's the kind of love I didn't give you. And my biggest regret is that. I grasped his grizzled hand. Dad, we cannot alter the past. No, he concurred. However, Olivia, I want you to know that I see you now. I see what a wonderful woman you are. Without any guidance from us, you have developed into an exceptional mother. And even though I didn't deserve it, I am incredibly pleased to be your father. I felt the unexpected healing power of those words, the apologies and acknowledgement I had sorely needed. They sealed a wound I was unaware was still open, but they did not undo 15 years of absence. I never could have imagined how life would continue to unfold. Our familial ties are nevertheless sincere despite their complexity. Beyond myself, the foundation and my work give me meaning. Every day, Callan develops into a more unique individual, continuing Elias's legacy while forging his own. I've discovered that our stories don't always fit into tidy, recognizable patterns. Sometimes those who ought to love us without conditions absolutely let us down. Strangers can occasionally save lives. Our greatest talents can occasionally be found in the darkest circumstances of our lives. Above everything, I've discovered this. Who leaves us doesn't have to determine who we are. How we decide to move forward defines who we are. We are all capable of writing our own tale. To turn suffering into meaning, rejection into resiliency, and desertion into independence. What would your life be like if you choose to identify yourself by your own bravery and moving on rather than by the people that abandoned you? Have you ever gone through a difficult rejection that ultimately brought about unanticipated growth? Please share your stories in the comments section below. Please like, subscribe, and share this trip with anybody you think could benefit from hearing that sometimes our greatest gifts can come from our deepest hurts. And ultimately, leading a life of strength, calm, and purpose was the best kind of retaliation, not rage or yelling. I became someone they could never break, not just someone who survived what they did to me. Establish boundaries if you're feeling betrayed or wounded. Get better. Expand. Let depart with honor. Your progress as quiet can be more powerful than words ever could. Have you ever used suffering to gain control? Please share your story in the comments section. Let's make room for recovery, development, and sincere dialogue. So, from what did you rise?